there was an online buzz regarding the four-star quarterback flip of Jonas Williams from Oregon over to USC. Got a lot of people talking. Is USC starting to take back over on the West Coast? Are the Trojans really becoming a growing threat to that of the Oregon Ducks on the West Coast? Now, people will say, I think, certain things to fit their narratives, and that's cool, and that's fine. People can say what they want. But I think you and I both know the situation with Jonas Williams and why that played out the way it did. When Oregon is declared a leader, one of the two teams that is in the hunt for Jared Curtis, when Oregon is pushing their chips into the middle of the Jared Curtis table, these are the kind of things that happen in a recruiting cycle when these events take place. Jonas Williams saw maybe what was happening with Oregon and their priorities at the quarterback position within the 26th class, and he went over to a really good place for quarterbacks as well in Lincoln Riley and USC. If Oregon is able to land Jared Curtis, I think everybody wins in this particular situation. But it does bring up a little bit of a bigger point. Does USC's growing confidence and momentum become a threat to the Oregon Ducks on the field? I think that's the big, because all of this is about winning. You can throw out 4 stars and 5 stars, and that's great when we talk about it in February and March and even in December on the early signing period. But all of this really comes to wins and losses. That's what really matters when I think it all comes down to it. And when you talk about wins and losses, both in recruiting and certainly on the football field, the last 10 years, 15 years, 18 years, I'll talk about that, why that's a key number here in just a little bit, I think has been mostly owned by the Oregon Ducks, certainly on the West Coast when you compare it to the USC Trojans. Oregon has won 10 more games and lost 10 less games over the last 2 years compared to the USC Trojans. Oregon under Dan Lanning is rising up the ladder, increasing their win total, whereas Lincoln Riley, who had a really good first year, may be going down that ladder just a little bit. Since the iPhone was released in 2007, yes, I know I might be cherry picking the date just a little bit after back-to-back national championships for the USC Trojans, and then of course they lost to Texas in that BCS national championship game as well, but that was 2007 when the iPhone was released, which is 18 years ago, which is the age of a high school senior. Since the first iPhone was released, USC has beaten Oregon just 3 times in 11 attempts. The Ducks have won 3 straight and 5 of their last 6. You got the same amount of national champions. Yes, we know you don't have to remind Oregon fans once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. We know what that number is, certainly right now. But USC and Oregon have the same amount of national championships since 2007. They have the same amount of Heisman Trophy winners since 2007. And why is that date important? Because it's currently 2025. That was 2007. 18 years ago, it's the age of a high school senior. A lot of these kids, and especially as more time continues to go by, once you get class of 2026, 27, 28, etc., a lot of these kids, for their lifetimes, they didn't see Matt Leinart growing up. They didn't see Reggie Bush growing up. Maybe they saw that. Maybe they saw both of those guys on the Big Noon Kickoff pregame set. But what have they seen on the West Coast? They've seen Oregon's success head-to-head. They've seen more Oregon Conference championships. That's what they've seen, and I think that's been a big part of why Oregon has been able to have the success that they've had recruiting-wise on the West Coast and also on the field. And I think a lot of it has to do in USC just not doing a good job recruiting the state of California. But you cannot deny the impact in a short period of time that general manager Chad Bowden has had so far on campus at USC. I think as more time continues to go by, Oregon is going to have more battles on the West Coast, folks. Is Oregon going to completely dominate on the West Coast like they did prior? I'm hoping they will. Class of 2026, they're still doing a really good job, despite maybe some of the narratives that are certainly sitting out there. But I think there's going to be more battles. Who's going to win those battles? That remains, I think, to be seen. Like, USC is a program that has too many resources. They have too much history right now going for them to be a 7-win team every year, to be an 8-win team every year. But when we talk about USC and the whole threat conversation as it pertains to Oregon, I think the Trojans are playing catch up. Let's just throw out a hypothetical scenario right now. Let's throw it out. Let's say USC closes out with an absolute bang. I still think Oregon is trending for better players right now than USC is. But let's just say USC ends up with a top 5 class. That'd be one USC top 5 class compared to, and let's just say Oregon. We feel pretty confident that they're going to end up with a top 5 class yet again. We know that Dan Lanning is the ultimate closer, right? Don't we? But let's just say that's how it goes. Now you got one top 5 class in 2026 for USC. And a lot of those players, might not be impact players on the team for another couple of years. Oregon, that would be their 3rd consecutive top 5 class. You maybe see where I'm going with this. Certainly a little bit. Like, if USC, even if they continue to stack top 5 class onto top 5 class, Oregon, I think, has much of a head start, certainly on them. So when it comes to the success on the field, Oregon already is one of the top Big Ten teams, and they're going to stay there because they continue to bring in better talent. I think a big question is maintaining. Will USC be able to maintain this year after year after year? And we have to go back to this last year's class. I think it was that 2025 class when USC had 2 5-star defensive line commitments from the Southeast, and they couldn't hang on to them. Now, that's why it's important for USC to really dive into the West Coast. I think it's really hard going over to that part of the country in the Southeast and to be able to maintain those guys and sign them over a long recruiting cycle. And that's why we're going to have more battles. Oregon is going to have more battles with USC, certainly on the West Coast. So you've got to be able to maintain classes year by year by year, and you've got to be able to maintain classes within a given cycle. It's more difficult now to hold on to players because of NIL certainly thrown around. You've seen what you saw Michigan, you've seen Oregon, like you've seen some of these big spenders certainly close late, and NIL and the financial part of college football recruiting has certainly played a big part in that. Now USC, it's been reported that their NIL game is certainly getting kicked into gear, but where does getting kicked into gear compare to maybe the Oregons of the world and what they're doing and what Michigan and some of these other schools certainly have as well? On the field is what this is all about. I talked about at the beginning. I talked about the head start that Oregon has on the recruiting trail. Oregon, of course, has the head start even for this season. Like, you look at 2025, I think Oregon has another college football playoff caliber roster. They have another Big Ten championship caliber roster. Do they have a national championship caliber roster? That remains to be seen. I look at this USC roster. There is no doubt that they are improving, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, which we know that's where USC needed to improve, and they did last year, and I think they're going to get better this year. I think they're going to be a good defense this year. But they got a question mark at Lincoln Riley's expertise at quarterback. Jaden Mayava or a true freshman in Husan Longstreet, that doesn't really instill a lot of confidence. I think Husan Longstreet is going to be a really good quarterback down the road. But right now in 2025, those two options don't really scream typical Lincoln Riley success at the quarterback position. The offensive line, I think they lost a handful of starters over there, and that was not a great offensive line, certainly last season. And we know the transfer departures that they had early in the offseason cycle. We talk about the head start. And if Oregon can have another 10-win or an 11-win regular season, and USC with this team, hey, maybe they improve, they get to 7 wins, they get to 8 wins, but it's just another example of Oregon just being levels above USC right now, and just how quickly can USC catch up to a team like Oregon. Right now, I believe that USC is maybe more of a growing threat on the recruiting trail than it is on the field right now. Last thing on this. I am dialed into a number of recruitments in the 2026 class to see how much more of a threat that the Trojans are going to be on the trail. Because if USC closes really, really strong, I think this is going to become more of a conversation. I'm dialed into the Rider Lions recruitment. Oregon and USC, two big contenders for that quarterback over there. Brandon Arrington, Mark Bowman, I talked about him before. Tomahini Tupoi, the defensive line commit to Oregon right now. There's been some smoke. Maybe USC could possibly get a little bit more involved. Maybe a flip. I think that one's going to go all the way down to signing day. Personally, I think there's both USC and Oregon very heavily invested into Tomahini Tupoi. So I'm going to monitor these specific West Coast kids. I'm going to monitor these specific West Coast recruitments where Oregon and USC are major players right now. If USC is able to get a majority of them, if USC is able to flip somebody like Tomahini Tupoi, then maybe we've got a bigger conversation on our hands. But we've seen it year after year after year. Oregon closes on the recruiting trail better than anybody.